I say it every offseason. I would love to have a debate, best conference in college football, but that debate has been null and void for the last close to 15 years. It's the SEC. It's not debatable. They win the championships. They win the postseason games. They finish with the best record against the best opponents every regular season. There are few slight exceptions, but when you put it all together, it's been the SEC each and every year until 2023. Are you checking out the results on the field? Forget the recruiting rankings. Forget what we think about the talent. Let's forget about what we think is going to happen down the road, especially in the postseason and in the playoffs. For right now, the SEC is in trouble. Let's rank the conferences in college football through 2 weeks and some significant games, many more to be played, especially in the ACC. Got to credit the ACC with that Notre Dame contract. They play probably the toughest non-conference schedule of any conference. Let's march through it, starting with the Big 12. Right now, the Big 12 conference stands at 20-8. That includes a 4-5 mark against the Power 5, 8-3 against the Group of 5, a perfect 8-0 against FCS opponents. The big wins include Texas over Bama, of course. That's at the top of all of college football. Florida State, LSU also in the running. Cincinnati defeated Pitt. Nice win for the Big 12 here as a substantial touchdown plus underdog on the road. Bearcats not supposed to be a good team this year, and they knock off Pitt. Also, Kansas, Illinois. I was anticipating this game to be a really good game, and the Jayhawks were clearly the better team before Illinois made a bit of a run in the fourth quarter, but Kansas clearly over Illinois. Good win for the Big 12. Oklahoma State in a lackluster affair over Arizona State, but still a win for the Big 12. Here are the big losses for the Big 12, and when I say big losses, I mean big games because none of these losses are really embarrassing. Texas Tech had a 2-score lead at home against Oregon. The Ducks are a really good team. One of the 15 best teams in college football. Texas Tech probably outplayed them, probably should have won the game. Got a close call go against them late that most likely would have iced the game. So tough loss for the Big 12 there. Texas Tech going down to Oregon 38-30. Utah Baylor, likewise. Baylor coming off the tough loss to Texas State. Takes Utah to the wire. They had a touchdown lead late. They give up 2 scores. They had a throw to the end zone that was most likely pass interference, so tough play on Baylor, and Utah wins it. And again, Baylor's probably a mid-tier team in the Big 12, and they're taking on the 2-time defending Pac-12 champions there. So if there's such a thing as a good loss, the Big 12 definitely has 2 right there, and some other ones that we're not going to necessarily hold against them. West Virginia is supposed to be one of the lesser teams in the Big 12. They took it on the chin against Penn State as expected. Colorado TCU, that game went down to the wire. TCU a 3-touchdown favorite, but now we're seeing that Colorado might be much better than we anticipated. Iowa State gave Iowa a decent game in this one. Coming off a win last year as a 4-8 team, Iowa State depleted on its roster, still took Iowa to a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. So all close, heartbreaking losses except the Penn State-West Virginia game. Some bad losses against Group of 5 teams. Rice defeats Houston, Texas State over Baylor, Wyoming over Texas Tech in overtime. Now let's check out what's coming up in the Big 12 this week because there's some opponents that are very familiar to Big 12 foes. First and foremost, we've got Kansas State at Missouri. The 2 teams got together last year, and the Wildcats won it easily 40-12. This time they go to Columbia as a favorite. BYU and Arkansas going to be a difficult one for the Big 12. Arkansas took it to the Cougars last year in Provo, 52-35. Pitt, West Virginia, of course. Pitt coming off the loss to Cincinnati, now takes on another Big 12 team. And Pitt won a really good game against the Mountaineers last year in the opener 38-31. And, of course, that's the backyard brawl with a lot of bad blood between the Mountaineers and the Panthers. Then we also have a couple key games against Group of 5 competition as South Alabama, a 10-3 team last year, goes to Oklahoma State. So that's not a give-me for the Cowboys. Likewise, the Longhorns, coming off the big Bama win, have to hold off Wyoming, who, of course, defeated Texas Tech a couple weeks ago. Really, the only somewhat major non-conference game after that would be SMU at TCU as those 2 teams get together each and every season. So again, the Big 12 stands at 4-5 against the Power 5 right now. My prediction, with only 3 more games to be played for the Big 12 against the rest of the Power 5, would be that they win 1, they lose 2, and most likely that's going to be Kansas State defeating Missouri and BYU going down, West Virginia going down in their matchups this week. So the prediction for the Big 12, 5-7 against the Power 5. Now let's move on to what's been a downtrodden conference for the last 5 or 6 years, and that's not the Pac-12. Yes, that is the Pac-12, but we're also talking about the ACC. In 2016, the ACC played better football out of conference than any conference. I still believed that the SEC was better, but the results said the ACC had the best postseason at 10-3 and won the national championship. Since then, under 500, well under 500 each and every year, and Notre Dame has had a heyday abusing the ACC, as we well know, with 29 consecutive regular season wins against this conference. But the ACC with some top-notch wins. Let's check it out. Of course, Florida State with the big win, scoring 31 straight points against LSU. North Carolina, the much better team against South Carolina in a key matchup against the SEC. Miami took out Texas A&M, scoring 48 points in that game, winning by 15. And Wake Forest took out Vandy 36-20. So, add it all up, the inferior ACC is 4-1 against the SEC. The losses against the Power 5 look like this. Virginia Tech gave up a fourth-quarter touchdown and lost at home against Purdue. We mentioned the Cincinnati-Pitt game, so big loss for the ACC there. Notre Dame took care of North Carolina State in Raleigh, and Tennessee over Virginia. No big shame in that. One of the best teams in the SEC and a top 10 team in the nation knocks off probably your worst team in Virginia by 36 points. The ACC has taken it on the chin twice against the group of 5. BC going down to Northern Illinois 31-28 and James Madison over Virginia 36-35. Some notable wins over the group of 5. Florida State just in resounding fashion over Southern Miss 66-13. And then we had North Carolina against App State. That has been quite the series in recent years. And the Tar Heels won it in overtime over App State. Don't overlook the Miami game in week 1. Not that the Red Hawks are anything special, but the Canes disposed of them easily, 38-35 by 5 touchdowns to set up the impressive performance against Texas A&M. Add it all up, the ACC's 4-4 against the Power 5, but they've got 17 more games to play. 6-2 against the group of 5, 8-0 against the FCS. Add it all up, it's 18-6 thus far for the ACC. The ACC and the Big Ten are basically playing a basketball-like challenge this weekend. Count them, 6 games between the ACC and the Big Ten. Now, it would be nice if those games involved Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Clemson, Florida State, and the like. They do not, but we go down to the mid and lower depths of each conference to set up these matchups. Again, 6 of them. Syracuse at Purdue, they played one of the best games of 2022 with Syracuse stealing a win at the Carrier Dome. Virginia at Maryland. The Terps have won a bowl game the last 2 seasons against ACC teams. Louisville at Indiana. The Cardinals will be a big favorite against the Hoosiers. Minnesota at North Carolina, both teams at 2-0. Should be the best matchup of the weekend. Northwestern at Duke. These 2 teams have played now 7 times since 2015. The Dukies have actually holding the lead. Northwestern at Duke. These 2 schools have played, and it seems apropos based on the academic status of each. They played 7 times now since 2015. Duke is up 4-2 in the series. Virginia Tech at Rutgers. A couple downtrodden teams, although the Rutgers Scarlet Knights are off to a nice 2-0 start. Also against the Power 5 this weekend, Pitt, West Virginia. We noted Georgia Tech taking on Ole Miss. The Yellow Jackets at home against the Rebels last year lost 42-0. And then later in the season, of course, again, Notre Dame has defeated ACC teams 29 consecutive times in the regular season. This is the schedule. Duke, Louisville, Pitt, Clemson, and Wake Forest all take on the Irish. And of course, Notre Dame's got the 1 win in the bag against the ACC and NC State. And, of course, the regular season concludes on Thanksgiving weekend, as it always does, with the ACC taking on the SEC 4 times. So right now it's 4-1 ACC. The SEC has much work to do, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky, and Clemson, South Carolina. You got to think that very much looks like a 2-2 series at best for the SEC. We shall see how the rest of the season plays out, of course. Now let's march on to the most surprising. Should it be the most surprising? Coming off a strong, solid showing for the most part until postseason play with some lackluster performances in the bowl season for the Pac-12, but 20 wins in 23 games for the Pac-12 and playing well against the Power 5. Colorado with the big wins against TCU and Nebraska. They dominated the Huskers in the second half. Oregon, Texas Tech, we talked about that one. Ducks able to survive in Lubbock. Utah, unimpressive win against Baylor, but they get the job done and pull it out on the road in Waco after an impressive dominant showing against the Florida Gators. Washington State, for a second consecutive year, is an underdog against Wisconsin, gets the win against the Badgers. Excellent win for the Pac-12, probably the best one on the board against an opponent here, considering the two teams on the field. The losses are not bad for the Pac-12. No bad losses. Auburn beat Cal. That's a decent SEC team, expected to be, taking on one of the lower teams in the Pac-12, and Cal missed 3 field goals. They only lost 14-10. They had a late lead in that game. Mississippi State, Arizona. How about this one? Bulldogs won it in Tucson last year, 39-17. This time the Wildcats played much better, were down 2 scores, came back, sent it to overtime, got a sketchy call at the end of the game on a 4th and 18 that turned out to be a measurement for a first down, and Arizona barely loses against Mississippi State. Arizona State loses to Oklahoma State 27-15. So again, no bad losses for the Pac-12. Also consider that in recent history, the Pac-12 has had all sorts of issues with the Mountain West. One particular year, they actually lost more games against the Mountain West than they won at 6-7 just a couple seasons ago. They're right now 7-0 against the Mountain West Conference. That is big, and that leads to these numbers. 6-3 against the Power 5. They've got 3 more coming, and then you've got 10-0 against the G5, and then you've got 4-0 is the record for the Pac-12 against FCS opponents. In week 3, we've got Washington and Michigan State. Consider that last season at this time, Michigan State was coming off 11-2 Peach Bowl win, top 10 finish. Washington coming off 4-8. Well, the Huskies proved to be a much better team, even way beyond 39-28, the final score. Now you've got a Michigan State team in disarray, considering the Mel Tucker situation with an interim coach in Harlan Barnett taking over. So Washington, a huge favorite at East Lansing to continue the good run against the Power 5. Otherwise, some decent affairs against the Group of 5 San Diego State that's been a thorn in the side of the Pac-12 in the past, but blown out by UCLA last week 35-10. And then we've got Oregon State at home in that matchup against the Aztecs. Colorado State at Colorado, all eyes on Dion and the Buffs. Fresno State beat Purdue a couple weeks ago. They take on Arizona State, so that could be a difficult matchup for the Pac-12. Keep in mind that UCLA and Oregon State do not play Power 5 teams. UCLA gets a bit of a mulligan for that since they had the series scheduled with Michigan that Michigan canceled. And now, of course, they're going to be colleagues in the Big Ten. Notre Dame takes on Stanford and USC in those traditional matchups, so those are 2 Power 5 games that have yet to be played. Right now, the Pac-12 is 6-3 against the Power 5. My prediction swings on Notre Dame USC. I predicted in the preseason that Notre Dame would win that game at home. If that is so, then I've got the Pac-12 going 8-4. If the Trojans go out there and defeat the Irish, they're not going to lose another game against the Power 5, and they're going to finish 9-3 against the Power 5. Now on to the big bad Big Ten, 18-4 right now against all non-conference foes, 3-3 against the Power 5. 10-1 against a Group of 5, 5-0 against the FCS. I'm extremely disappointed another season now at the lack of big games played by the Big Ten outside the conference. The wins right now, lackluster. Iowa State, that should be a win. Penn State over West Virginia, a mismatch. Purdue, Virginia Tech, good win actually for the Big Ten. lower end team for the Big Ten, expected to be a lower end team against one of the worst teams in the ACC. They got a win on the road. Nebraska embarrassed at Boulder against Colorado. Wisconsin loses as a touchdown favorite in Pullman, and Illinois, Kansas. And again, the Jayhawks annihilate the Fighting Illini in the first half. Illinois puts up a meager comeback to make it respectable on the scoreboard at 34-23. And a group of 5 loss, Fresno State defeats Purdue. As we mentioned in our ACC recap, the ACC and the Big Ten get together 6 times. 6 times. I think a lot of Big Ten and national college football fans would love to see the Big Ten match up 6 times against the SEC. These matchups don't necessarily favor either conference. I think if one of those 2 conferences can win 4 of 6, that would be a major positive, because most likely it's going to be a 3-3 split. Also, the huge one for the conference, playing the best team in the non-conference schedule, could be North Carolina, but most likely it's going to be Notre Dame when the Buckeyes go there in week 4, the final weekend of September. The Big Ten right now 3-3 against the Power 5. We've got the projection finishing at just 6-7 for the Big Ten against the other 4 major conferences. And now finally, the SEC, the best conference in college football in terms of recruiting rankings, in terms of the past, in every such way. But on the field, the SEC looks awful right now. 23-6 looks pretty decent. Let's add it all up. 11 games against the FCS. That puffs up the record just a little bit. 3-6 against the Power 5, 9-0 against Group of 5 teams. Any good wins here? Not really. Tennessee beat Virginia, possibly the worst team in the ACC. Mississippi State should beat Arizona, especially at home. They had to eke out a win in overtime as a 9-point favorite. And again, Auburn went to Cal as a touchdown favorite and barely slipped by the Golden Bears, a 4-8 team last year. The losses, okay, I've got no issue with Florida going to Utah, one of the tougher places to play in college football, and they're playing up in seeding. They did look pretty awful in losing 24-11. The South Carolina and North Carolina loss, not a good one for the SEC. Those are like programs, and South Carolina took a beating, as did LSU against Florida State. Again, this is one of the 2 marquee matchups for the SEC, and they got whipped in this game in the fourth quarter. 31 consecutive points by Florida State. Texas, Bama. Texas, really good game until about 7 minutes left to play, but Texas took over. They were clearly the better team in Tuscaloosa, where Bama's not lost a non-conference game since... I can't think of one. We'll have to look it up. I think you have to go all the way back to that Louisiana Tech game in Nick Saban's first season since Bama's lost a non-conference game at home. Miami beat Texas A&M. The Aggies looked awful in that game. They got a couple gifts in the first quarter to put 2 scores on the board. Then they were playing from behind the rest of the way, gave up a ton of points, 48, Wake over Vandy. Of course, nobody expects anything out of Vandy out of conference. One decent win. This might be the best win, actually, for the SEC. It's not even against a Power 5. It's Ole Miss over Tulane. And that was not an easy win, and Tulane starting quarterback Michael Pratt did not play. The SEC does not have enough games in the regular season to make amends and prove to be the best conference in college football. We're going to have to wait until the postseason for SEC fans for you to brag about being the best conference in college football. You can brag about the past, but in terms of what's going on right now, the SEC is getting whipped. And the matchups don't look that good this weekend. Kansas State, a better team than Missouri, but the Tigers could certainly win that game. Georgia Tech, Ole Miss, good matchup for the SEC. Arkansas, BYU, the Hogs should win at home. Now at the end of the season, of course, we've got the ACC against the SEC in the 4 games we mentioned, those traditional rivals. And that should probably turn out to be a 2-2 affair. Georgia, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Kentucky, Florida, Florida State, and Clemson, South Carolina. Add it all up, and I'm looking at 7-9 is my prediction for the SEC against the other 4 conferences in the regular season. Of course, they're going to have 10 or 11 teams make bowl play. And that's going to be another 11 outings that we can add up. And then we'll argue about the context of the bowl games and who's sitting out and how much they mean and what the motivation is. But the record is the record. It's going to come down to the playoffs for the SEC. If they play extremely well the rest of the year, against these other conferences. But right now, 3-6 will probably equal 7-9 at the end of the regular season. These are the rankings for the conferences through week 2, with a ton of good games coming up this weekend. Not really marquee matchups. No LSU, Florida State, no Texas, Bama, Notre Dame, Ohio State in a couple weeks. And keep in mind, when we add up the conference records against the Power 5, it should add up to 500, correct? Well, no, because we got Notre Dame playing 10 games against the Power 5, and they win most of them. So if you add it all up, it's going to be sub 500 because of the Notre Dame factor. Right now, if you ask me just to throw out the results and just go on what I believe the ranking should be, what I believe is the best conference in college football, I still think it's the SEC. I believe it's the Big Ten number 2, the Pac-12 3. And I think it's close, though. I believe that for the first time in forever, it's close between the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. And then you've got the Big 12 and the ACC. However, we're not going by that. It's like the top 25 that actually makes sense. I will one of these times deliver my top 25 teams as I see it, not based on the resumes. Let's go to the resumes. Best conference in college football, based on the results on the field, is the Pac-12. The ACC's number 2. And then it's really close between the other 3. And the Big Ten has I won't say the weakest, but the thinnest resume. They have played the least number of teams, but they've got 6 against the ACC this weekend. So much is going to be determined this weekend. So I'll go Big 12 at number 3 with those wins by Texas in particular over Bama. Really good showing there. And the losses are understandable. Baylor going down to Utah, close game there. Texas Tech, excruciatingly close against Oregon. So I give the nod to the Big 12 at number 3, the Big 10 at number 4, and the worst conference in college football, it's the SEC. Leave your comments down below. This is always a good conversation. Comparing the conferences, ranking the conferences. Best discussion, debate, and analysis right here at the Voice of College Football.